participants. I'm Leslie Ungar, Electric Impulse Communication. I started this concept of a Zoom session with the most famous person I know that will take my call, my email, or my text. I started it during shelter at home, safer at home, when I started out Zoom sessions that were educational. And I quickly got tired of being educated and educating, and kind of felt like all of you got tired of being educated. So one Saturday night when I had nothing else to do, I came up with the concept of who did I know that I could share with you, the Electric Impulse community, to kind of break the COVID time that seems to go forever and yet go fast at the same time. So the idea is, who do I know that will answer me? Well, some people say that a person needs no introduction. And some people may say that our guest today needs no introduction. But as a communication coach, I believe everyone needs an introduction. My introduction is not going to tell you that he won 4 national championships at Youngstown State, 6 Big Ten titles at Ohio State, 1 national championship, beat that team from Tressel 9 times. My introduction of Jim Tressel is going to tell you that no matter when you text this man, he will answer you, even if it is Thanksgiving evening. And the reason I think that's so important is how many people say they were too busy to get back to you, yet you will always get an answer. My introduction will tell you that if he ever looks at you over his wire rims rather than through them, you know that it's going to be a come to Jesus moment, because I can't tell you how powerful that look can be. I will tell you that my words for 2020 have been reimagine, resilience, rebrand, pivot, and grit. And there's no one that I can think of that represents those words more than Jim Tressel. When I started out the idea of the most famous person I know, it wasn't to educate. The funny thing happened on the way to these Zoom sessions. Each guest I've had has offered a nugget or two that has been more educational than the educational sessions that were supposed to be educational. The CEO from Marvel Studios talked about speaking 2 languages, the language of the creatives and the language of the suit. Campy Russell talking about scorers and shooters. The international actor talking about how hard it was to audition on Zoom. And the CDC doctor talking about working at the White House. Imagine the resilience that it took to rebrand in your 50s from a coach to a college president. The grit to win 9 times against Michigan. The grace to get a 4-topper every night at Bo's when he was living at the Hilton, so that in case someone wanted to join, there was always a seat or 2. We have 40 minutes with Jim Tressel. I will take about the first 20, and then I will open it up to your questions. If you ask questions through chat, please just do it for everyone to be able to see, or you can ask him live. It is my pleasure to introduce the current president of Youngstown State University, Mr. Jim Tressel. Welcome, Jim, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Leslie. And when you talk to me about these Zooms that you've been having, and we've all been living on Zoom, some of them have been fun and engaging, like I hope this one is, and others have been highly instructional, and they put their PowerPoints up and your eyes get glazed over, but it's been a good exercise for all of us. And I know here at the university, when we had to pivot in March, our students were on spring break, and we had to make the decision for them to stay home and give them their quality instruction remotely. That was a great challenge for our faculty. They did an amazing job. Our IT area, whenever you get thrust into tough situations, you find out if you have a team. It's easy when it's rolling along pretty well and things are happening well, but when you get thrown curveball like we all have in this pandemic, it was fun to watch our people come together. And even though we were doing so remotely, we tried to empty the campus out as much as we could. We still had a core group here every day. And then really in education, many times they say, well, you get a little break in the summer. Well, the summer was probably the busiest summer I think I've ever had. And we had to figure out what are we going to do in the fall and how are we going to make it meaningful. And we knew our students were dying to get back here, but we had to do it safely. And so we created 5 different modalities of which they could participate face-to-face, of course, in some classes. We had an agile hybrid that had 2 or 3 different ways to do it, where the students kind of rotated in. Some were in the class, some weren't. And then, of course, we had the clear line option. And so our fall semester really went pretty well. Didn't start getting a whole bunch of cases until right around that mid-November. We got a little bit of a spike, but fortunately, we never had a student in the hospital. And we only had 1 employee in the hospital, and that was back in July, and he did fine. And so we just had our virtual commencement on Sunday. And you think, well, let's take a break. We've been going hard and fast and so forth, but we start thinking about, well, the students will be back January 11th. We've got to figure out how to do this better. And then what are we going to do about planning for next year? Is it going to be like this? Is it so? Us, like all of you, this has been a nonstop exercise, but at the same time, there's a lot of the things that you need to be working on from a strategic standpoint that regardless of this pandemic, you needed to be progressing. And so we've been trying to keep that strategic planning and that view of the future. We talk about take charge of our future. Higher education is really in a challenging time, as are many business and industries and organizations. And we just finished a book, Leslie, that I gave to my department chairs and deans and administrators and whatnot that I thought was appropriate for the times that I would share with this group. And some of you have maybe had a chance to see it. But it's called A Time to Build. And it was written by Yuval Levin, A Time to Build. And it was written before the pandemic, but it really speaks to both the pandemic and the social things that have been going on and the political things that have been going on. And I would recommend that book to anyone because it's always a time to build, but there are really pivotal times. And I think, whether it's our country or our civilization or whatever, are really in a pivotal moment. That,
Speaking of a saying like that, I want to ask you, some of you that have followed my newsletters know that my dad was a water boy for the Ohio State football team before World War II. I grew up on some sayings that he said were Ohio State football sayings that I must have heard every single day of my life. So when I said to my sister, who I think is on here somewhere, hi Lisa, I said to my sister, I wish that my dad was alive to see this Zoom session. And she said, well, what would he want you to ask? So I want to ask you about these 2 sayings that I heard every single day of my life and ask you to weigh in on them. The first one is, a true winner never gives up. Well, a football game comes to an end, but sometimes in life, our challenges don't come to an end. We have to decide, when do we give up? When do we pivot? When do we have the resilience to keep going? So would you weigh in on a true winner never gives up?
Yeah, I think I would weigh in on it this way. I've used that phrase many times, but not a true winner, more like a true leader, because I've always felt that a leader is someone that has been given the opportunity to serve, and regardless of the circumstances, we can never give up. We can never stop, no matter what the score is or what the pandemic is or what the third quarter's financials look like or whatever it happens to be. And so I've always felt that if that could be embodied by the leadership of a group, by the servants of the group, and of course, in every group, everyone is a leader, everyone serves one another, but there to I think if those of us that have that blessing to be in those leadership positions can embody that aura that, hey, we know it's tough. We know we didn't plan on this. I never dreamed this would happen, but we're not going to give up. And if you embody that, if you have that aura of that, I think it can permeate the rest of the group. And if the rest of the group just continues to keep on keeping on, we have a chance.
Now, would that be related to the other saying that I heard every single day of my life was, winners come from behind? Now, I don't know if he just told me that because I was always behind, but he would always say, winners come from behind. So can you weigh in on that saying?
Well, I think winners, I've always said winners win. That's just, there's just some people that, are winners, and they just do that. Every place they've been, they used to talk about Bobby Knight, the old basketball coach. They said he could win against you with his players, and then he could take your players and he could win. Winners win. And I think winners come from behind is just one of the qualities that winners have. It really doesn't matter if you're ahead, you're behind. Your focus on what needs to be done remains the same. You don't allow yourself to lose focus on fundamental things that you need to accomplish, regardless of, if it didn't go the way you wanted it, or, the ball bounced the wrong way, or the official made the different call, or, all the things that contribute, or if you made some mistakes. We all can make mistakes, but the winner stays focused on what it takes to win, and they know how to do that. And it really doesn't matter if they're ahead or behind. You shouldn't be able to tell the difference when you look at a winner, what the score is. They should look the same way, act the same way, and press on the same way.
I like that. Now, one question I've always wanted to ask you. When you came to the University of Akron in 2012 as Vice President of Strategic Engagement, you weren't wearing the famous vest. So how along that journey down 71 from Columbus to Akron, how did you decide to lose the vest? Because you could have been a vice president with a vest. How did you decide in the rebranding of yourself to lose the vest?
Well, I don't know if it was a conscious decision. When you're a vice president, I was in that room with all the other vice presidents and provosts and presidents and legal counsels and all that, and they all dressed up, and they didn't roll in a coaching shirt and a vest and so forth. So I needed to be a part of the environment, but I did have plenty of University of Akron vests, that I would wear with the students and whatnot. So it was not a conscious decision not to do that. It really wasn't a conscious decision to have the vest be somewhat of a calling card. I just happened to wear sweater vests a couple of times at Youngstown State. And when I got to Ohio State, they asked me, what are you going to wear on the sideline? And I said, I don't know. What do you want me to wear? And they said, well, what have you done at Youngstown State? And I said, well, our games were in the evening. It was a little chilly. So I would, most of the time put a sweater vest on. They said, okay, that's what you're wearing. And so they mandated, I had no choice but to wear the vest.
Interesting.
It was 95 degrees on a 12 noon kickoff in the Horseshoe with 106,000 people. I had no choice. I had to wear a vest. So that was not a conscious decision to make that a brand, nor it was a conscious decision to wear less of it.
Now, I had heard, when you were in Columbus, I had heard about this class that you taught. So I was very excited when you came to Akron, and I heard you were teaching a class. 16 weeks, I think it was like 2.5 hours or something, once a week in the evening, 80 some students, graduate students, undergraduate students. Now, I was not taking that class for any credit. Didn't matter what grade I got on it, but somehow you got me to come to every class, do all my homework, do my projects. How do you get people to do their best for you?
One of the things I've grown to believe is that sometimes students get a little bit too focused on the grade and they want to earn the credit. And that's natural because grades then become GPAs, then become scholarship opportunities, and you graduate, or with a worker that if they get certain number of credits, degrees, their pay goes up, or they have to have continuing ed credits so they can remain and so forth. And that's okay. But the real magic, I think, to taking a class or investing your time in learning is for the joy of learning. And I had a real interesting moment. We had a Rhodes Scholar at Youngstown State in, I think it was 2016. Great young lady, Ashley Orr. And Ashley was from a rural community south of Youngstown. She was held back in first grade, didn't have a father, grandmother raised her, didn't have 2 dimes to put together. She had a teacher in elementary school pique her interest in learning math. And so she became a brilliant student, came here, had a internship at the Cleveland Federal Reserve, and she had an internship at the London School of Economics, and then got the first ever Rhodes Scholarship at Youngstown State. And it was significant because prior to that, only 3 public schools in Ohio had ever had a Rhodes Scholarship. Ohio State, Cincinnati, and Miami were the only 3 that ever had one. And I remember taking her out to a high school to talk to the honor students, and she said she really grew to love school and love education when she stopped thinking about the grades and she started thinking about what she could learn. And that's when she wanted to be in class. That's when she wanted to do the assignments, wanted to do the extra credit. It wasn't for the grades. And it was really interesting watching those young students' eyes because they were honor students and everyone beat on them to get a 4.0 and to get a high test score, and maybe they could get into the finest schools and all that. And here was this little girl from rural Ohio who had just won a Rhodes Scholarship from little old Youngstown State, giving them the advice that you won't turn the corner until you enjoy and have a passion for learning and forget about those grades and credits.
Now, kind of on the other side of that, I have always wanted to be in a locker room at halftime and hear one of those famous, inspiring halftime talks. Now, most people on the Zoom session won't be giving a halftime talk in the locker room, but what can we learn from a locker room talk? First of all, can a great talk at halftime make a difference in the second half? And what can someone learn that needs to inspire their salespeople, or their attorneys or their staff in any way? What can an exceptional halftime talk do?
I always thought that pregame orators and halftime speeches were really highly overrated. We always thought when it was time for pregame that we had prepared, we had a plan, we knew what we were going to go out and do, and if we were really worthy, we didn't need to have any inspiration because we had really prepared. What happens at halftime is you find out how your plan is going because, the other folks are allowed to have a plan. The other people have scholarships. The other people have good players. They compete. And so halftime to me is really, again, not about fiery speeches and so forth. It's about evaluating what do we have to do to adjust to the plan? What is it that is in front of us? What are the challenges? What are the obstacles? What are the competitors doing? How do we need to adjust? Or do we just need to stick to the same plan we have? We have to do it better and so forth. Very seldom. I can only recall one time at Ohio State that our halftime turned into a little bit of a boisterous, loud, hey, let's wake up type thing. And we were behind Penn State by, I don't know, a couple touchdowns. And we had played terribly, and we were basically out there sleepwalking. I think we thought going into the game, we allowed ourselves to think that we were going to win the game handily. And again, Penn State's darn good. And so I remember, getting a little bit boisterous and a little bit loud and a little bit excited, which it happened so seldom that was a little bit of a wake up. And we went out and took care of business and so forth. And some of the guys said, hey, you know what? I needed that tongue lashing at this moment because honestly, I hadn't prepared like we normally do. So, but for the most part, 99% of the time, pregame and halftime is simply one more moment to prepare and adjust.
Thank you. That's interesting. Thank you. That's something that all of us can benefit from, readjusting, pivoting. Before I go to my words of 2020 and how they apply to you, I want to ask you, recently you did a commercial with Urban Meyer about wearing masks. Now, although masks shouldn't be political, wearing a mask has become political. So I'm curious, did you get more positive feedback for that commercial or more negative feedback for that commercial?
I don't know. I was on a call with the governor after that commercial had been on for a couple of weeks, and I apologized to him that ever since our commercial went on, the number of cases rose, and so that we obviously weren't too convincing with our commercial. But really, I didn't get a whole bunch of feedback either way. I had some people say, "Hey, I saw you on a commercial," and so forth. But now I'm not on social media, so I don't look at Facebook or I don't look at Instagram or whatever else there is out there. So the only thing I do on social media is I tweet every morning what a quiet time thought. And now I do that only because we used to always have quiet time with my players every day. And they told me, hey, since we're not together, how about just reminding us every morning? So it was kind of a private thing that turned into a public thing because it's Twitter, but never, do I look at Twitter or respond or hear things one way or the other. So I don't really know the answer to your question.
But you did the commercials because you and Urban Meyer are someone that the state, respects and looks up to. Would you get a vaccine publicly?
Oh, I suppose if I was asked to, yeah.
Our first Zoom famous person was a CEO of Marvel Studios, and he credited his success to being able to speak the language of the creatives and the language of the suits. As both a football coach and as a president of a university, you have to speak a lot of languages to students, to faculty, to staff, to donors, to recruits, to their parents. Could you just take a minute to talk about the different audiences, kind of the different languages that you need to speak in order to be successful?
I've always thought that when people talk about communication, languages and so forth, that the most important communication skill or language that one must master is the language of listening. And it really change whether it's a student athlete or a colleague or a donor or a faculty member. I think in order to connect with someone, they first need to believe that you hear what they're thinking, what they feel. I've always said that if you would like to influence, you need to be influenceable. And until someone knows that you'll listen to how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they believe, the plan that they might have, if you won't do that, I'm not sure they're going to listen to your infinite wisdom. And so the language of listening, I think, would be the one that I've always believed that you need to master.
Now, thank you. Before I turn it over, I want to ask you about my words for 2020 that I think you represent. And, as I've said in my emails about the Zoom session, you and this session are my gift to the Electric Impulse community. I think partly because you embody the resilience and the rebranding, that reimagining. Can you just take a minute to talk about the role of resilience, of rebranding, of just kind of regrouping, and then I'm going to ask you about pivot and grit. So the resilience, the rebranding, the re-energizing. Can you take a minute to talk about those words?
I kind of look at the resilience and the grit kind of in one pocket or one bucket. I've grown to believe that there are certain no doubt traits that regardless of what we're doing, that we've got to embody. And kind of in somewhat of an order. And, and I always like to think of 5 traits and, which one is the 5th most important, which is the 4th, 3rd, 2. So obviously everyone knows my number 5. Everyone doesn't know that, but everyone knows that number 5 in my mind, work ethic, it's non-negotiable. We haven't met anyone that's good at whatever it is they do if they don't work. My number 4 is that you have to have some talent or competencies developed in order to contribute. So you have to put your skills together. That's my number 4. My number 3 is that you have to be a curious person. You have to have extreme curiosity, because regardless of how well you're going along, if you're not curious about how you can do it better, or if you're not curious to learn more, if you think you've arrived, your progress will end right there. So that's my number 3. Now, my number 2, in my mind, the second most important trait we need to have is that grit and that resilience. Because the reality we all have, especially those of us that have lived for as many decades as I have, is that we know there's going to be times when it's going well and times when it isn't. And that's the fact. I don't care who you are. I don't care how large a celebrity or how successful or whatever you are. There's going to be moments when it goes just like you planned, moments when you can't believe it even happened, and the situation that you're in. And having that grit, developing that grit, having that resilience, and that speaks to pivoting too. There's a time, and Frank Stamps is on this call. He knows that he's got a lot of friends that are superstar young people in sports. Then they go and they get to go to the college and they get to enjoy that. And then they maybe even get to go to the NFL or NBA or wherever. There's going to be a moment where that ends. Mm-hmm. And that's probably one of the most difficult things that I've witnessed, because I've been around so many young people that have had that progression. And are you going to have that ability to pivot? In fact, I was just on the phone this morning with a young guy that I coached and was in the NFL, and then he was in a business of sorts for about 10 years, and he's now in a pivot situation, and he's struggling a little bit. Having that resilience and that grit to fight through a pivot, whether you wanted to pivot or not. Sometimes you have a pivot and it wasn't your call. And so in my mind, that might be the second most important trait any one of us need to embody if we're going to reach our potential. We're going to become the best we can be at whatever it is we're doing. I think you have to have that grit and resilience, that willingness to pivot, most especially in a pandemic time.
Now, my last question before I got probably 20 that I won't have time for as I open it up. But my last question I want to ask you, as I mentioned, when you were living at the Hilton while you were building your home in Akron, and you would eat at Bo's many nights of the week, Candace Campbell Jackson told me that you would get a table for 4, even though it was only you and Ellen. So in case anyone wanted to join you, I call that grace. I once waited to talk to you. You were speaking somewhere or other, and I waited to talk to you, and you spent so much time asking and listening to a young lady who was an English major. And I remember standing there thinking, how can you be that interested in an English major? But you were. And I would call that a grace. So my word for 2021 is grace. And I wondered if you could weigh in on that for a moment.
Well, I think there's no question as we look at, especially the times, this has been a little bit of a cantankerous time here in this, whether it be caused by the pandemic or social things that have gone on or political things that have gone on. And when you get into those tense times, maybe it's a little more difficult to have that grace. Because we're all human. And so I think reminding yourself, like you're saying, hey, that's your word for the future. I think being good at something or improving in an area or whatever it happens to be is intentional. I think you make that decision that, I'm going to do a better job being, kind and graceful and nice. And, I've said many times as I've listened to some of our leaders, it's really not that hard to be nice. And why, sometimes now we only get sound bites. So, 23 hours of the day, someone might be nice, but unfortunately we get sound bites where, 10 minutes in the day, they're not nice. And so we say, okay, they must not be nice people. I don't think we have that license to decide who's graceful, who's not, who's nice, who's not. But if we can be as intentionally graceful and kind and nice as possible, it's something that we have to consciously work on. And I think it is a, huge redeemable quality.
I'm going to open it up. I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Let me know, give me a hands up or something if you have a question. I want to share the last 10 minutes with all of you. And I'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask Tim the question that you have. Who would like to go first? Yes, Fred Zampano, go.
Hi, Leslie. Thank you. Hi, Coach.
Hi, Fred.
As a big fan of Ohio State football, I remember back in 2002 and the great season that you had, and then the big reward was to face University of Miami, and they were quite a renowned team and really a feared team, and they were great favorites in that game. I just wonder, how did you convince your players that, hey, we got a big hill to climb here, but how do you inspire them and challenge them and lead them? And obviously, we all know the end result, but how do you lead a group to rise to what looked to be a really formidable challenge?
Yeah, I think anytime that you're posed with a challenge, the important thing is to focus on whatever it is you can do and not allow the noise of whatever anyone else thinks. And so, of course, the whole country thought, they had won 34 straight games and they had just won the national championship and they had unbelievable players and that they were going to, be able to beat us and so forth. And that's what everyone was saying. But we could not allow that noise to affect our preparation. So if we would do that the best we could, then, we'd have to see how we match up. I think one of the advantages we had was perhaps some of that noise. And maybe that noise got to Miami. And so, maybe, they were thinking they could, I don't know. But I knew this for sure. Everyone in America knew how good they were. I mean, they were a fantastic team. We knew it, they knew it, the world knew it. And I'm not sure everyone knew just how good we were or just how good we wanted to be. And I think that was kind of just, in some ways, an advantage for us. And I've been in games where that was a disadvantage for us. Everyone said we were wonderful. And everyone said we were the best. And sometimes you let young people especially allow that to creep into their minds. And it became a disadvantage. But I knew this. We were a good team. It was going to take an extraordinary effort. And we were going to have to be willing to play up to our ability for a long, long time. We couldn't just do it part of the game or whatever. But we had very capable players. And so it wasn't like it was a total mismatch. But that's kind of the way the public thought it was. And in some ways, that played to our advantage, but I couldn't have been prouder of those guys for, how focused they were on simply doing whatever we were capable of doing. And if that was enough, then we were going to be the champions. If that was not, then we weren't. And going into the game, I was very comfortable with the way we had prepared, had no idea how the game would come out. And it took a couple overtimes to find out, but it was a special day for our Buckeye Nation and for our university and for everyone involved. And that was probably the most fun part of it, is because it had been so long since we had been champions. And there were a lot of people that thought that day may never come again. And when it did, it's like anything else. if you don't think something that you crave is ever going to happen again, and then it does, it even tastes better. And it was a lot of fun.
Now, because of Jim's busy schedule, we only have him for 5 more minutes. So who would like to ask another question? Let me know. Yes, Eric, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if you could comment on what was the most difficult thing in your transition from football coach to educational university administrator, and also maybe comment on what similarities there were that helped you.
You know, the similarities were that it was human beings who were there to try to serve young people, because I had served young people 18 to 22 for 40 years and same business. The difficult part was that I had spent so long in a focused, myopic part of the university, and I didn't really know and understand the whole university. I was so fortunate to have 2 years with Dr. Proenza and all of the staff at the University of Akron that I just went to school. I mean, I just as much as I could possibly learn, and it was really a very rewarding and eye-opening time for me, because I knew what I had done for years I loved doing, and I felt it was important. But you know what I found out? There's a whole bunch of people doing a lot of different things that are as exciting and they are as impactful, and it means as much to them as what I was doing meant to me. And it kind of really made me passionate about trying to be impactful on a broader scope. Now, it was harder because in my former life, I had student athletes and a dozen coaches, and then all of a sudden we had thousands of students, you know, different colleges and majors, and so it's more difficult. Believe it or not, it's more time consuming. And but you know, I'm still learning to this day.
Daryl, I'm going to give you the last question from our audience. Daryl, what is your question for Jim Tressel?
Yes, as an authority figure relating to students that many of them have various family backgrounds, sometimes tragic, how do you accomplish that?
You know, it kind of goes back to when Leslie was talking about those languages. And, you know, I've found that if you can listen closely to what the young person has been through, what they've learned, what they're thinking. We had a little acronym called WAYT, which is what are you thinking? We wanted to know what you're thinking. And there's different thoughts coming from different backgrounds. We're all kind of a compilation of our experiences and our background. And so just having that passion to find out about what makes someone tick, what their challenges are, what their vantage point is, what's important to them, how can we help? I just saw a good quote the other day, and it was from George Washington, and I had never heard this, but he said as he took over being the general of the United States forces, hey, here's my game plan, and it's really easy. I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to see where I can help. And that's pretty simple, regardless of the person you're dealing with, the background or the experiences or their viewpoint. If you listen and you learn, and then you see where you can help, if all of us do that, you know, we'll have a chance to collectively be successful.
On that note, because I believe your person hitting their time marks is a promise that you make your audience and you make your speaker, and I promise 40 minutes. This Zoom session with Jim Tressel has been my holiday gift to you, members of the Electric Impulse community, and hopefully future members. Jim exemplifies to me resilience and reimagining, rebranding, grit, pivot, and my word for 2021, grace. I don't know if there's a future for the Zoom session with the most famous person I know. I don't know if I'm going to continue it. Perhaps you can let me know what you think about that. It's always my pleasure and my honor to help you be your best, especially in the coming year 2021. We do that by coaching, speaking, and speech writing. can see our schedule of events on our website, electricimpulse.com. Today was designed to be a COVID break and a holiday respite before the virtual busyness of the season. Thank you to Jim Tressel. Thank you to all of you Jim, amazingly, if you take nothing else from this, it might not be the most important thing to him, but to me, the man always answers his texts. And I don't think there's very many people I can say that about. I have stood in a little boutique in Mexico, texting him that I just met his super fan because I knew he would answer me in the time I was standing there. So for that resilience, that grit, and that grace, I thank all of you for joining us. And Jim, I thank you so much for being my guest of this holiday season.
And Leslie, if I saw a couple questions come up on chat,
Yes.
and if you want to email those to me,
Okay.
I'd be happy to email back to the person and at least give my vantage point to the question that they had.
I will do that.
Good questions go up there.
Yes, yes. Lots of good questions. We could keep you for forever. I thank you so much. I thank all of you, and please continue to stay in touch.